Hello, and welcome to Triggered Care. I'm Alex. Now, my last video was about sexual assault and the conversations that I've had around it. And near the end of that video, I stated something like, the root cause of it is something else that could be its own video. And that's sort of what this video is, which was also motivated by the events that happened on January 6th in DC at the Capitol. And not that all of those people were men by any stretch of the imagination, but there were a lot of men there. And so I kind of want to tackle this issue because it is so important that we think critically about where violence comes from, where abuse comes from, the birthplace of it, and how to combat it intelligently, how to combat it with using our capacity to reason and logic versus our reaction to it, which can be more violence. So, where does the violence come from? And this is my own personal opinion, and everything I've seen in my life is violence comes from repression, from very systematic, automatic repression that is encouraged through our media, it's encouraged through our parents, it's encouraged through a lot of different things in our lives to be quiet about being sad or be quiet about being angry, and how to be proper and what topics we should avoid and appropriate ways to show our emotion and inappropriate or more stigmatized ways of showing our emotion. A good example right off the top of my head is Big Boys Don't Cry, and that cliche really making it hard for men to show their feelings. And it has the same effect on women, but I think predominantly here, I'm talking generally. Obviously, there are margins of error. So when I talk about this stuff, I'm talking in a general sense, that there's a stigma against men for having emotions, especially sadness. Now, what happens with sadness if you don't express it is it can very easily turn into anger. And I have quite a bit of personal experience with repression. I repressed a lot of my negative emotions, both sadness and anger, all throughout my childhood, which resulted in self-harm. It resulted in me cutting myself. It also resulted in me getting into physical fights, mostly with boys my age, and letting out aggression that way. And wrestling with my sister. We actually had like a fight club when we were younger to get some of that aggression out in an appropriate way where my mother would encourage it. And a lot of that, for me, I believe, came from feeling like I wasn't able to express my anger when it popped up, and I wasn't able to express my sadness. I wasn't allowed to cry. And with that as my foundational thinking patterns, all those emotions have to go somewhere. They will leak out of your body, whether it's a conscious decision or not. And I think it's really important that we remember this while we're seeing violence take an uptick in the United States. Is, as a culture, we heavily reward the strong, silent cliche of what strength means. It means that you don't talk to anybody and you handle everything yourself, when in reality, that's making us move backwards. I've also noticed this relationship between repression and violence with ex-partners and my family growing up, where there would be a good while of peace and goodness, of no violent actions being taken. You can kind of relax a little bit. Everything's calmed down. And then all of a sudden one day the shoe drops and people are getting beat, or there's a rape coming, or whatever it is, where you can almost anticipate it, like, oh, they need to let out their emotions now, and this is how they let it out. And living in that cycle, which I've lived in for a super long time, is very emotionally draining, and it keeps you stuck in the same thinking patterns. And so to combat this logically, we need to learn as a culture, as a society, we need to learn how to let those emotions out appropriately and peacefully. And does that mean that all arguments and conflicts are going to stop? No, that doesn't mean that. There can still be arguments, conflicts, confrontation without using violence. And that will lead us to more of a debate, which I think is way more healthy than violent outbursts, but it's still going to be quite the transition. And in order to teach people how to not repress their feelings and how to express them appropriately and how to express them without hurting themselves or other people, that requires a space to explore their feelings in a non-judgmental way. Which I know this does sound frustrating, especially for survivors, to think that our abusers need a safe space to explore their feelings after all of the hurt and damage that they have caused. However, if we actually want to take a look at what the issue is, it's abusers being raised by abusers who were raised by abusers who were raised by abusers. We have a long line of generations of physical and emotional abuse, which we need to break out of that cycle together. And we need to have empathy and understanding for what has caused it in order to move past it. And I know that that is difficult. I still think people should be held accountable for their actions. If you are acting out violently and hurting people, you should be held accountable for that. I also think that there should be rehabilitation available to those people. And part of taking that accountability is taking accountability for your mental state and taking the time to educate yourself on how the body works, how the mind works, how they communicate with each other, and how to be more at peace with the people that you're around and with yourself. So I just wanted to throw this out there. I've been in a really stressful place in the last week, and people that I know have been feeling similarly. So I kind of just wanted to get a video out there kind of explaining what I meant by the end of my last video, and also shedding light on how it kind of connects to everything in a broad way. And I hope everyone's having good ones, and just sending love and good feelings out there, and hopefully we can get through this month without any more extreme sadness.